good? Looking perfect. All right. Hi, everybody. Briana Whitney here, host of True Crime Arizona. I know we're waiting for people to come join us for this live Q&A discussion about our documentary, The Forgotten. But I'm so excited to be doing this with you guys. You know, we spent about 8 months putting together this documentary about the missing and murdered Indigenous women crisis here in Arizona. And it took us all over the state. We went to the Navajo Nation. We went to Flagstaff to interview some families there. And so to be able to share this documentary with our Arizona's Family viewers and our listeners on the podcast is just amazing. But this is the first time we've ever done a Q&A, a live Q&A show on YouTube and Facebook. I've done Facebook Lives, I've done Instagram Lives before, but I haven't done something quite like this where it's on all these different platforms and I can actually interact with so many of you guys live. So we're hoping everybody's going to come join us. We have some questions that are queued up from the documentary that's already on YouTube. And then I know we've been promoting it. And if you're in the Valley, you've been seeing the promos that tonight at 8 o'clock on Channel 3, just in less than an hour, The Forgotten is also going to be premiering on 3 TV. So I want to tell you guys just a little bit of background as we wait. And I also want people to send in their questions. If you comment on YouTube, if you comment on Facebook, we'll get those questions in live and then I can actually address them and talk about them. I have a bunch of stats that are in front of me too that we can kind of reference some things from. So just a little bit of what went into making the documentary about The Forgotten. I'd first gotten this idea when I had seen the show Alaska Daily on Hulu. And I've actually had a few people tell me that they also watched that show. But it's about this small Alaska newspaper that looks into a murder case of an Indigenous woman that had no attention for years. And it basically, it's the first time that they've brought it into the spotlight. It's a great show. And that kind of sparked my interest. I knew we had an MMIW crisis here in Arizona, but I didn't know exactly how bad it was or really how it got to that point, and that's why I wanted to investigate it. So what I started to do was reach out to different people. And it's hard because for a long time, Native families and the tribes have had somewhat of a distrust with anybody else in the community, especially the media. It's hard for us to kind of break those barriers. And so I knew I needed to go about it really respectfully and just let these families know that I care, I'm passionate about it, and I want to help create some change. And so if you watch the documentary, which is on YouTube right now, we interviewed Darlene Gomez, who is an attorney. She works pro bono for a lot of these families who have missing and murdered loved ones. And she was the one that actually got me in contact with the Sorrell family and the Yazzie family. If you've watched the documentary, you know that it is centered around 2 cases. Laverta Sorrell, who was a mom who went missing in 2002, and Jamie Yazzie, who was a mom who went missing in 2019 and was later found dead in 2021. And both of those cases highlight a lot of the issues that these families have faced for decades and decades, just trying to get resources or attention to their cases. And that's why we chose to focus on those ones. So I'm gonna go through, we're getting some of these comments here. And if I look down, it's because I'm looking at the comments that are coming in. But I do see people are asking, can this be viewed online? Yes. If you type in True Crime Arizona, The Forgotten, it'll come right up with our Arizona's Family YouTube page. You can click it there and watch it online. That's great. And I see Beth is watching from Sholo, thanking us for highlighting missing Native Americans. Thank you for watching this. We appreciate it. I want to go to, Jason, if we could, go to some of the viewer comments we've gotten from the documentary on YouTube. That way we can address some of these issues as people are also coming through with other questions. So this looks like, this is from Selena. She was looking at the documentary on YouTube and wrote, how can non-tribal members help? Is there some way we can sign up for volunteer police officers, registered nurses, volunteer to make posters, donate food, supplies, lobby our state senators? Tell us what you need, please. That is honestly a great question. And I think more than anything, what I've learned from doing this investigation and working with these families is that they really need the awareness, because the more awareness there is about these cases or about what they're struggling with, the more likely officials, leaders, lawmakers are going to hear what's going on and then want to help create some change. And I have seen a lot of comments that have dealt with the whole sovereignty issue. We know that these tribes are sovereign nations. The Navajo Nation is a sovereign nation, and that means that they govern themselves. That is correct. But what we found in this investigation and this doing this documentary was that the jurisdiction issues are so far and wide because the federal government does have jurisdiction there over major crimes like homicides, sometimes a missing persons case if there are suspicious circumstances around it. The state police don't have as much jurisdiction generally, but they can prosecute non-native offenders, and then the tribal police deal with native offenders, native victims, but it's very, very, very confusing. And that is something that they are trying to address, is kind of fixing the jurisdictional issues. We need our law enforcement agencies to better communicate with each other, to streamline how they collect data, and that way that they can do a better job of properly investigating these cases. That was something that came up time and time again as we were going through everything. And it seems like they are actually committed to making some change. Once we got the governor, the attorney general, and then Navajo Nation president and police chief to kind of all talk about the same issues and realize they needed to work together better moving forward, that's where we started to see some differences. Jason, want to pull up another comment? And I'm going to come down here as well. Okay, somebody wrote here, I'll come back to this one, but let's pull up this one. I appreciate you making this video. This is from Mimi. My aunt was murdered by her boyfriend on the Navajo reservation, but the coroner did not charge him due to the fact that the coroner deemed her death to be natural. A video of her hiding in the desert from him was previously posted to her Facebook page. 2 months later, she passed away. He did something to her. So this is a heartbreaking comment because obviously we're dealing with somebody who did die. But that is also something that we learned through our time talking, especially to the Native families in this case. A lot of them were told to kind of push things under the rug, that if somebody died or something happened or somebody disappeared, you don't really talk about it. They're probably out on a binge. There was a lot of victim blaming that was going on. And so because of that, they were told, well, you just don't talk about it, kind of, sweep it under the rug and move on. And I think part of that problem, that might have played right into that. If the coroner deemed the death natural, if there was really some suspicious circumstances around it, it probably should have been better investigated. And that's hard because we just don't know every factor that was part of that case. But a comment like that doesn't necessarily surprise me based on everything we've learned. And that's the really, really sad part here. You want to make sure everybody is getting the justice they deserve in a case. And that highlights one of those things. I'm going to look at the comments over here. Let's see, we've got going on. Okay, my question, where is federal law enforcement? This is from Wendy. Thank you, Wendy. So where is federal law enforcement? They generally have to be called in by tribal police to actually go onto the reservation and investigate. Now, that being said, their jurisdiction is major crimes like homicide. So that is when the FBI should be taking over on the tribal lands and investigating a case. But you really have to have the tribal police and the FBI or federal law enforcement working hand in hand together to have that relationship work out and make sure that there's not any step that's missed when you're talking about an investigation like that. So the FBI says that in Arizona, Indian affairs, Indian country is a top priority. And that might be true, but what we found was that, unfortunately, if a case is prosecuted federally, if it's investigated by the FBI and then prosecuted by the U.S. Attorney's Office, all of the evidence in that case will end up going to the FBI's lab in Quantico, nowhere near Arizona. But the problem is that the evidence, like in Jamie Yazie's case that's featured in the documentary, can sometimes sit on a shelf for years, and while that's happening, the perpetrator is free and is able to commit other crimes. That is what we saw happen, which is a really scary situation and one that is troubling. So the hope would be maybe the FBI can work with at least our state government a little bit better, and maybe they can come up with some sort of either statutory change or relationship where they could test more of that evidence from a federal case in our state crime labs, because our state crime labs can sometimes get information, DNA evidence back in a couple weeks. So if you're talking a couple weeks versus a couple years, way different. So that was something we brought up with Governor Katie Hobbs was, hey, could you take this to the federal government? Could you take this to President Biden? Could you talk to the FBI about, is there a change here that we can make? It was only in about the last year that all evidence in a federal case had to go to Quantico and didn't get sent out to some of our state labs. So that was a real breakdown that we saw as a huge problem, because if you're not processing this evidence fast enough and you're not prosecuting the people who should be held accountable for these crimes, then you're just perpetuating the issue because they're still out there offending or victimizing other people. I want to see what else we got here. Okay, so I see somebody replying to Wendy too. There's very limited officers and hundreds of miles of open land to patrol. That's exactly correct. We interviewed the Navajo Nation police chief as part of our investigation in the documentary. I have to say, I was pretty impressed with him. He's in a really tough position because a lot of these issues are decades and decades old, and he was hired on as police chief last year. So he is now trying to reverse so many years of issues, but he was very forthcoming, very transparent with me about what's gone wrong. He was telling me that at any given time on the Navajo Nation, and there's several districts within the Navajo Nation, they might have 2 to 4 officers per district, or covering about 5,000 to 7,000 square miles. That is impossible to get everywhere, especially when you're talking about rural areas where there might not be cell service or broadband, where it might be hard to even find the address that's making a call or a 911 call like that. So that can be really, really difficult, and he's trying to kind of fix that as well. He was telling me part of the problem here it's not so much the resources of hiring the officers. There's interest on Navajo Nation for young people to be police officers. The problem is that so many of them were failing background checks, already had criminal history. And so when you have this large group that wants to be police officers and only 15 to 20 are passing background checks, then you just don't have enough people coming through the academy to fully staff the police department and then make sure that there's more officers covering those square miles. So that was kind of something that we dealt with as well. Let me see if there's more coming in here. Okay, Jason, yeah. Oh, perfect, we got another one, okay. And thanks for bearing with us as we do this live. We're gonna grab another one. Okay, we got this one up. All right, so this is from Loretta on YouTube. Also, part of the problem is the state's police are not allowed on the reservations. It is considered a sovereign nation. There needs to be a full cooperation between the state police and the Navajo tribal police, even with the city police. I think broadband is an excellent idea. Anything would be a positive step forward. So, okay, perfect. Oh, we've got more here too. That's great. That is kind of what we were talking about with that sovereignty issue. And the broadband situation is also really important. We now know that Governor Hobbs, Attorney General Mays, with this new Missing and Murdered Indigenous Peoples Task Force, they are working actively now at expanding broadband and making sure that there is 100% broadband connectivity to all of Arizona, which includes our rural areas and our reservations. That is part of the huge issue here. Sometimes people can't even call in to 911 for anything, any crime, let alone something like this where you're talking about a very heavy homicide. And you guys are seeing right now on your screen too, we're playing some video of Jamie Yazzie and her family. This is one of the cases that's featured in the documentary. Jamie Yazzie, she was a mom of 3 young boys in 2019. She was a pediatric nursing assistant at a center on the Navajo Nation, and she had a ton of friends. And her case was heartbreaking because she went missing, and people didn't know she was missing for several days. They suspected her boyfriend might have been responsible for her going missing, and that when they figured this out, they found a lot of blood evidence inside the house, the boyfriend's house, a partially burnt mattress, all sorts of things that would very much indicate that there was somebody who was either severely hurt or died in that house. And it was that evidence that took 2 years at Quantico to process. And Jamie was eventually found dead on the Hopi reservation, and her family is still fighting for their remains. Jamie's remains are still with the U.S. Attorney's Office and the federal government because they told the family it's their best chance at convicting her boyfriend, Trey James. And you're seeing her dad on camera right now. What's really heartbreaking here is Jamie Yazzie's dad is super sick. He is not well enough to do a whole lot. And Jamie was actually planning to move back down to Phoenix from the Navajo Nation to help take care of him. And I think one of the most heartbreaking parts of this documentary is James Yazzie trying to stay just alive to see justice for his daughter. Jamie's boyfriend is slated to go to trial for her murder in September of this year up in Flagstaff, and we're going to be following that. I want to check out some of these other comments as well. Let's see. Can't the family be assigned a prosecutor to help them? That is a really good question, actually. So, yes, they are assigned a prosecutor to help them within the U.S. Attorney's Office, and that is their liaison. The thing is, it's kind of case by case as to how helpful that person that is assigned to them is. What happened with the FBI, for example, with Laverta Sorrell's case, was that they have been assigned 5 different FBI investigators since she went missing in 2002. And that's because they just kind of cycle through. You know, they're assigned something for a while and then they move or they're sent somewhere else. And that becomes a problem because then that next investigator is having to start over. Some of them are more forthcoming and a little more warm with these families. Some of them are not. And the FBI in particular said that they specifically don't release a lot of information to these families because they don't want it to get out to social media, to people who might have bad intentions, to compromise the investigation. And that's kind of a catch-22 because it definitely makes sense. You don't want to compromise your investigation. They want every possibility to prosecute the correct person for these crimes. However, a lot of these families are just asking for the basics. You know, hey, are you still looking into the case? Is there anything that's new that you can share with me? Is there anything we can do? You know, they just want an open line of communication, and a lot of times they're not getting that. I will say, Darlene, the attorney who's working for the Yazzie family and the Sorrell family and helping kind of relay between the government and them, said that the U.S. Attorney's Office and the FBI, who made it possible this week on Monday to lead the Yazzie family to where Jamie was found on the Hopi Reservation in 2021. She was really thankful for that. And that she said that was kind of the first time they felt that they were really moving forward together as government and as family in the right direction, because relationships have been tense and strained for so many years. So it's really kind of trying to mend those, repair those, and then move forward together. I'm going to also look at some other comments here. Let's see, are there stipulations with Navajo police can only hire Navajo people? If so, do you see that as a contributing factor? That's a good question, and I don't even know if I know that. I don't know if they have to be Navajo or not to join. I assume that they have to be part of the reservation, part of the tribe, to be part of that police department, but that's a really good question that I don't know. I will reach out to the Navajo Nation police chief and ask him that, because that's a great question. I think you have to at least live in the area to be able to work there. But I think, too, it also comes down to interest. A lot of people who are not part of the tribes, if they want to become a police officer, generally want to become a police officer in, the cities or the counties or sheriff's deputy, the counties around here. But for the most part, I'm going to guess that you have to be part of the tribe, but I don't know for sure, and that is something I'll find out. That was a great question. Let's see what we have down here. I know it's sad, and they have such distrust in the government as well. That is from Crystal Lynn. Thank you. Yes, that's kind of been the underlying factor with all of this here, is that there are so many years of our Native people feeling ostracized, feeling like they don't get the same attention as others. And this has definitely gone on through so many generations. There's not just one thing that's led to this. And unfortunately, it's led to this centuries-long distrust. And what you're seeing on the other side of the screen here is some of the video we shot and used in our documentary from the reservation. And, something that struck me, I admittedly had never been to the Navajo Nation before we went there for our documentary. And they deal with so much poverty there. I mean, the resources are so slim. Even just around the Capitol, where the president and his whole cabinet is, it's a beautiful area, but there's barely any restaurants. The houses, some of them don't even have running water, and so you're dealing with not only distrust in government, but also so much poverty, and that makes things so difficult too. that you just can't really get things done properly when there's not even the money or the finances to make things happen. And that's something that the president of Navajo Nation is working on changing, working on getting more money from either federal grants or the state to try and fix those situations. And I know Attorney General Mays is also working on training and resources to our tribes, just trying to make sure that they have the ability to properly investigate these cases when they happen, because that's half the battle right there, is that they happen, and it's terrible that they do, and there's a lot more that needs to go into preventing the crimes themselves. But then when they happen, if they're not properly investigated, there's a reason why people say that in 48 hours is such a key time, because if you don't find things out or make change or make some headway in the first 48 hours after somebody goes missing, time just starts to tick, and it makes that investigation so much harder. It also makes it a lot less likely that somebody might still be alive. So time is of the essence, and sometimes there's just no urgency because either one, police can't get to that rural area very well, or they can't get resources out there, or two, there's been kind of this lackadaisical approach from officers that, are just like, well, it's in our list of people. And that's what the police chief is trying to change as well. Jason, do we have any more comments from there? And then I don't know if I can I?
Yeah, I think we just got one.
Yeah, let me see. Can I switch between these? Or is there, you would switch something over here, but I don't know how to.
Just scroll down. Oh,
down here?
There you go. It should be coming up at the end there.
Right here?
Yeah.
I don't know. Bear with us. We're still learning as we go here. But I also wanted to go through, while we figure that out, I also wanted to go through some of our stats. So there was no data on this at all until 2020, which is shocking, completely shocking. And I interviewed former state lawmaker Jennifer Germain in the documentary. And the reason why is because she led the first study on MMIW in Arizona. And so they basically partnered with ASU to create data on this so they could at least know where to start. Like how big of an issue are we facing in Arizona? And it took going through old police reports, trying to track people down to even get somewhere else. Okay, we brought up another YouTube. I'll come back to that, but let's talk about this. This is via YouTube. Why isn't this news more televised? I'm barely watching and seeing this documentary today. Having a YouTube segment still feels like it's not getting the attention it needs to be. Yeah, that's correct. That's exactly why we're doing this documentary. We can only do our best to aid in bringing this all to light. But the reality is we need a lot more people to pay attention, to get this in the spotlight. I know that even while I was working on this documentary, there were several cases that had a break in the case or something like that when it came to like native cold cases. And so I reported on that and I put it out there. We're putting stuff on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, TikTok, even everything like that. We are trying to get this out there. And Darlene Gomez her law firm has a TikTok that's very dedicated to MMIW, and they're getting a lot of views. I think that the problem is that sometimes we don't even know about these cases, and that's something we're working on too, is working with the law enforcement agencies that are tribal agencies. If you have somebody go missing or you have a cold case you want featured, let us know. That way we can make sure to get it out there. And so that's part of it, right? We're talking about social media, getting it more out there. But that's exactly why we did this documentary. The reality is, you have cases like Gabby Petito, like Lacey Peterson, like Natalie Holloway, and you say those names and everybody knows who they are because there was so much media coverage. And it's great that there's that much media coverage. You want the spotlight. When somebody goes missing like that, you want that spotlight on their case. These families just want to feel that their sisters and mothers and friends and family members have that same spotlight. And that's what we're working on, getting out there and getting more spotlight on moving forward. Okay, so let's see, we got another question here. In your research, was there a difference in how many cases are being processed amongst other tribes in AZ, like the San Carlos Apache tribe? That's a great question. So I don't know specifically for the San Carlos Apache tribe. What I do know is Navajo Nation is actually probably the most proactive in trying to get these cases out there. There are some tribes that report to the BIA, the Bureau of Indian Affairs, and then there are some tribes like Navajo Nation that don't. So this is where it gets very tricky with jurisdictional issues. Navajo Nation probably is working the most, it feels, with the FBI, the federal government. And that might be because they have so many members. And so there are more major crimes that are happening there that the FBI right now is investigating. I do know Salt River Indian Pima community also is doing a pretty good job at getting cases out there. But it kind of differs tribe to tribe. And then, of course, what kind of crime you're working with. There was something I was going to say, though, that affects that. I know that they're building a lab. I forget which tribe it is, and I apologize for that. They are building another lab to be able to test evidence. That's going to be huge, especially for our tribal police, to get that evidence somewhere in a reasonable manner, a timely manner. But there is a difference in just how these tribes operate. I do remember what I was going to say. Arizona is not required, unless it's a child, to report a missing person to the database NamUs. It's called NamUs. That's where it's basically the biggest hub for missing people. So City of Phoenix Police Department, things like that, they do report to NamUs, and so does Navajo Nation. Navajo Nation is one of our only tribes that is reporting to NamUs, but because it's not a requirement, a lot of our tribes, or even the smaller tribes here, they're not submitting their missing persons cases to NamUs. So the problem is we don't really know the scope of how big the crisis is here in Arizona because it is so underreported. I have some stats from for Arizona. So we did look at NamUs, and the last data we had looked at was actually in March of this year. But as of March, there were 80 active open missing Indigenous persons cases in Arizona. That number is definitely significantly lower than there actually is. And if we had a requirement to actually report those, that would change things a little bit. And that was something that I was asking Governor Hobbs about too. Can you make a change like that? What would it take to have that requirement in Arizona, and would it change things? And she was saying she thought it would need statutory change, or we would need like a lawmaker to propose a new bill that would make that a requirement here. So I mean, that's something I would like to see on a personal level, just doing this documentary. At least if you have a place in Arizona where it is a requirement to put missing persons cases, that is at least one database that you could go to and get all of the information right there in one place. And I think that's something that we're lacking right now, is just, it might be part of NamUs, but it also might not. Maybe it's on record with a tribe and their police, but then the state police don't know or the federal police don't know. That jurisdictional maze is what they call it in the study. It just makes things so difficult. And so if we could streamline that and get communication going, that would be much better. Okay, I did answer this question earlier, but somebody said, where is federal law enforcement? That's what I was saying. If they have to be called out there to actually be able to investigate, but generally the FBI is who is investigating major crime cases on our reservations. So that's kind of where that stands. I just also want to talk to you about how kind the families were to me and to our team as we were investigating this. For somebody that's obviously not part of the Native community, I was really impressed with how the Sorrell family and the Yazzie family were so welcoming to our team, to our cameras, everything like that, to let us into their most vulnerable moments. That's something that may not have happened several years ago because there just wasn't as good of a relationship between the media and our tribes. And I want the Native community in Arizona, and I mean all over the United States, but the fact that we are here working in Arizona, I want that community to know that we are listening, that we do care, and that we want to make sure that they are getting the attention they deserve, that their family members deserve, and that their communities deserve. And so what I really noticed talking to both of these families was that it's this younger generation of Native Americans, maybe in their 30s, maybe 40s, but this younger generation that is kind of changing the narrative that they've had for so many years. They were taught to brush things under the rug, and they were taught that, you don't really talk about the dead. And if you can't talk about the dead, then there's not a lot that can be done when you're trying to talk about a case where somebody might have been killed. And so, Jamie Yazie's sister and her aunt really struck me on this, and they said, we're not going to be quiet anymore. We know that that's how things have been, but we're no longer going to do that, because that is not how we're going to get their names out there and get attention to our cases. We have to be vocal. We have to speak up. The conditions we've been living in for so long is no longer what we believe to be the best way of living. We want to get things out there and make a change. And I thought that was so powerful. You're seeing that change in firsthand, and I loved that. Okay, so here is Trina, apologize if I pronounced that wrong, from YouTube. As an Indigenous person from AZ, I'm both Navajo and Apache. I appreciate the work you took into approaching this topic. It's refreshing to see people outside of Native spaces care about our community. Thank you. I'm so glad that we were able to do that. And I agree, I was even nervous covering this and starting this. I wasn't even sure how I would be received by that community. And I didn't know a whole lot about it. And I should know more, and now I do, but I didn't know a whole lot. And so I really appreciate how welcoming people were. The new Navajo Nation president, Boone Nygren, and his cabinet, and then Chief Daryl Noon, the police chief there, could not have been nicer in welcoming us to their lands. They let us shoot drone video and get everything we needed, and made sure that we had full access to everything. And that is a huge step forward in and of itself, to be able to be welcomed onto their land and make them feel comfortable and safe in sharing these things with us is huge. And so the best that we can do with that is what we want to do going forward. And I think for me, I've never really done such an impactful project. Where that this is a really important story that's going to make some change. And I've felt real passionate and fired up all week, just because we had this first air on CBS 5 last Sunday, and now tonight, in about 25 minutes, it's going to be airing for the first time on Channel 3. I think knowing that people are listening, that this is being well received, and making a difference is kind of the best thing that we could do. And I've never felt such purpose in a true crime project like this, to just know that people are listening, and this might actually help perpetuate fixing things. Maybe we can speed up the broadband expansion. We can maybe look at new laws. Will there be a lawmaker that wants to introduce a new bill that could help with things like this? Federal funding, state funding, resources, all of that stuff. And that's all things that we highlighted. And I was really encouraged by the fact that Jamie Yazie's family, less than 24 hours after this documentary aired for the first time, was finally taken to the area on the Hopi Reservation where she was killed, or where she was, where her remains were found. They had been asking for that since February of 2022. We're now in June of 2023. And yes, it took a long time, and it never should have taken that long. But we are seeing change, and there is a lot of hope in that. So I think that was just fantastic. Jason, do we have any more comments you see? Okay. It looks like we've gone through most of our comments or questions. I appreciate you guys joining us. We want to do more of this going forward, and so I love the participation. We can take comments from the YouTube as well, and this is awesome to have kind of this open dialogue, this Q&A that we can just do together. So I appreciate everybody joining us. Make sure, if you are in Arizona, in the Valley here, turn on Channel 3. In about 20 minutes is going to be the debut of The Forgotten, our documentary, on Channel 3. And if you are not able to turn that on, or you're somewhere else outside of the Arizona Valley here, you can catch The Forgotten on our YouTube page. You'll see it right there at the top. And leave a comment. Let us know what you think. We are reading the comments. We're actively going through them, learning about things that people want us to look into more, or other questions people have. So leave us a comment. We hope you like it. We hope that you feel impacted by the work we're doing. And it's definitely an honor to be able to do these kinds of investigations. So appreciate everybody, and we'll see you in just a little bit on Channel 3 for the Showtime premiere of The Forgotten.
Thanks for watching Arizona's Family. Watch us live wherever you are. Our mobile and streaming news app. You can also watch us on Roku, Apple TV, Fire TV, and Android TV. Subscribe on YouTube for live breaking news and video on demand.